A millionaire catches a poor boy dancing with his paralyzed daughter. What happened surprised everyone, and when he discovered who the boy was, his tears fell. Before we dive into the story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. The storm clouds gathered over downtown Chicago as Alexander Sterling pulled his silver BMW into the medical center's parking garage. At 38, he commanded a business empire worth over $150 million. But wealth meant nothing when his 5-year-old daughter Sophia was struggling through another difficult day. The specialist had been clear about the spinal cord damage from the car crash. Sophia would never walk again. Yet Alexander refused to surrender to that reality, chasing every new treatment, every glimmer of hope that medical science might offer. "Papa, look over there," Sophia's voice called from her wheelchair, pointing toward the medical center's small courtyard, visible through the glass entrance. Alexander followed her gaze and stopped breathing. A young boy, perhaps 6 years old, was moving gracefully through the falling rain. His clothing was worn and soaked, his auburn hair plastered against his head. What struck Alexander wasn't the child's obvious poverty, but his extraordinary movement. The boy danced with breathtaking beauty, spinning and leaping as if the storm was his partner, each gesture flowing like water, professional in its execution despite his tender age. "He moves like the dancers in my storybooks, Papa," Sophia whispered, pressing her palm against the cool window. "Like he's talking to the sky." Alexander's chest tightened. His daughter hadn't expressed wonder about anything since the accident 8 months ago. She'd withdrawn into herself, unreachable despite the best therapists money could secure. "Can we watch him dance?" Sophia asked, her green eyes bright for the first time in months. Against his instincts, Alexander wheeled Sophia to the covered walkway. The boy noticed them immediately, freezing mid-movement, his wide hazel eyes filled with surprise and terror. "I'm sorry, sir," the boy stammered, stepping backward. "I wasn't causing trouble. I'll go away now." "Wait," Sophia called, her voice stronger than Alexander had heard in months. "Please don't leave. Your dancing is beautiful." The boy hesitated, looking between Alexander's tailored coat and Sophia's wheelchair with confusion. You want to watch me?" "I love watching you," Sophia said simply. "What's your name?" "Danny," the boy replied cautiously, no longer retreating but still ready to run. "I'm Sophia, and this is my papa, Alexander." "Where do you live, Danny?" The question hung heavy in the air. Danny's eyes darted toward the alley behind the medical building, then back to Sophia's innocent face. "I stay wherever the rain can't reach me," Danny said quietly. Something fractured inside Alexander's chest. This child was homeless, had probably been surviving alone for who knows how long. Yet here he was, creating beauty in a storm as naturally as breathing. "Danny," Alexander heard himself say, "would you like to come inside where it's warm?" Terror flashed across the boy's features. "I can't, sir. They'll call the authorities, and then I'll have to go to the terrible place." "What terrible place?" Alexander asked gently. But Danny was already backing away, shaking his head frantically. "I have to go." "I'm sorry I bothered you and the nice girl." "You didn't bother us," Sophia called desperately. "Danny, please don't go." But the boy had already vanished into the maze of alleys, leaving Alexander and Sophia staring after him in stunned silence. As they sat there, Alexander noticed something gleaming in a puddle where Danny had been dancing. He walked over and retrieved a small water-damaged photograph. When he turned it over, his world tilted. The photograph showed Danny, maybe 4 years old, standing beside a woman with golden hair and emerald eyes identical to Sophia's. At the bottom, in faded purple ink, were the words, "Danny and Mama, New Year 2020. Alexander's hands trembled as he studied the photo, because the woman looked exactly like someone from his past, someone he thought had died years ago. Alexander stared at the photograph until his vision blurred. The woman's face was unmistakable. Elena Hartwell, his first love, the woman whose memorial service he'd attended 9 years ago. But the date on the photo read, New Year 2020, just 4 years after her supposed death. The rain had ceased, but Alexander's mind remained turbulent. He stood in his study overlooking the Chicago River, the city lights wavering through his unshed tears. Sophia had finally drifted to sleep after hours of talking about the magical dancing boy, the first genuine excitement she'd shown since her accident. Her laughter had echoed through their home tonight, a sound he'd feared was lost forever. But now, clutching this impossible photograph, Alexander felt his carefully ordered world beginning to collapse. Elena Hartwell, the woman he'd loved with the passionate intensity of youth, the woman his family had convinced him was unsuitable for a Sterling, the woman who'd walked away with tears streaming down her face, but her dignity intact. He'd been 24 then, fresh from Northwestern's business program, heir to a shipping dynasty, intoxicated by his own possibilities. Elena had been 22, a contemporary dancer working multiple jobs to afford her tiny Chicago apartment. They'd met at a bookstore cafe where she performed evening poetry readings for extra income. He'd fallen for her voice before seeing her face. For 3 years, they'd been inseparable. Alexander had loved her with the reckless passion of someone who'd never truly faced denial. He'd planned to propose, had purchased a ring, had envisioned a future filled with her grace and laughter. But his father, Harrison Sterling, had different plans. "She doesn't belong in our world, Alexander," he'd said during one of their final conversations. "Consider board meetings, charity functions, family portraits in the business journals. Consider what she'd do to our standing." The pressure had been unrelenting. Business partners questioning his judgment, social events where Elena was made to feel like an outsider. His mother's subtle cruelty that cut deeper than open hostility. Finally, Elena had made the choice for them both. "I can't watch you torn between me and everything you've been raised for," she'd said that cold February morning. "We both know what you'll choose eventually." "I'm sparing us both the heartbreak." She'd left that day, and Alexander had let her go, convincing himself it was the mature decision. Within months, he'd buried himself in work, building his empire piece by piece, telling himself he'd chosen wisely. 6 years later, her parents had called with devastating news. Car accident on an icy night. She'd been driving alone, they said. No other family survived. Alexander had attended the funeral from the back, standing under an umbrella, watching as they buried the woman he'd never stopped loving. He'd thrown earth on her casket and vowed never to love so recklessly again. He'd kept that promise for 9 years. Now he reached for his phone and called Detective Maria Santos, a college friend who'd assisted with corporate security matters over the years. "Maria, I need you to investigate something quietly. A woman named Elena Hartwell supposedly died in a car accident 9 years ago in Chicago. I need to know if she really died." "Alex, it's nearly midnight. What's this about?" "Just please. And there's a homeless boy, maybe 6 years old, calls himself Danny. He's been living rough near Mercy Medical Center. I need to know everything about him." "But Maria, complete discretion. No official channels, no records." After ending the call, Alexander opened his safe and retrieved a box he hadn't touched in years. Inside were letters Elena had written during their relationship, photographs of happier times, and the engagement ring he'd never found courage to give her. As he held her letters, one phrase echoed in his mind. "I'll always love you, Alexander, no matter what comes between us." What if she'd tried to reach him after leaving? What if she'd needed help and he'd missed it. What if the boy dancing in the rain was somehow connected to her? His hand shook as he searched through old emails, phone records, anything that might contain a clue. By sunrise, Alexander had found nothing concrete. But the photograph remained, tangible proof that everything he believed about the past was wrong. The real question was, if Elena had been alive 4 years ago, where was she now? And why was a child who reminded him so strongly of her living on the streets, dancing alone in the storm? When Alexander arrived at Carson's corner store the next morning with a bag of warm breakfast pastries and hot coffee, Danny was already awake. The boy was folding his cardboard shelter with practiced efficiency, every movement purposeful and economical. He moved like someone who'd learned that survival depended on being ready to flee at any moment. "Danny," Alexander called softly, approaching with his hands visible and unthreatening. The boy spun around, instantly alert, muscles coiled for escape. When he recognized Alexander, confusion flickered across his features. "Mr. Alexander, is Sophia all right? Did something happen to her?" The genuine concern in Danny's voice caught Alexander off guard. This child who had nothing was worried about someone else's well-being. "She's fine. She wanted me to invite you for breakfast. She's been asking about you since she woke up." Danny's eyes narrowed with the hard-earned suspicion of someone far too young to be so cynical. "Rich people don't have breakfast with street kids. What do you really want?" Alexander knelt down, meeting Danny at eye level. "Sophia hasn't smiled like she did yesterday since her accident 8 months ago. You gave her something I thought was gone forever. I want to understand how." "I just danced," Danny said defensively. "I wasn't doing anything wrong." "I know. Sophia sees something special in you, and so do I. Would you consider coming to our house just for breakfast? No conditions attached." For the next 20 minutes, Alexander watched as Danny wrestled with the decision. The boy was clearly hungry. His thin frame and hollow cheeks told that story. But he was also terrified of trusting adults. Alexander could see the internal battle playing out across Danny's expressive face. Desperate need warring with learned caution. "If I come," Danny said finally, his voice small but firm, "and you try to call those government people, I'll run. I'm really fast, and I know places they'll never find me." "No government people," Alexander promised solemnly. "Just breakfast with Sophia." The drive to Alexander's estate in Lincoln Park was tense, with Danny pressed against the car door as if ready to escape at any moment. His eyes darted constantly between the door handle and Alexander's hands on the steering wheel. When they pulled through the electronic gates and up the curved driveway, Danny's breath caught audibly. "You live here," he whispered, staring at the sprawling Georgian mansion with its manicured lawns and fountain. "It's just a house," Alexander said gently. "What makes it special are the people inside." Sophia was waiting on the front terrace in her wheelchair, practically vibrating with excitement. The moment Danny stepped out of the car, her face illuminated like sunrise. "Danny, you came!" "I made Papa buy all your favorite breakfast foods, except I don't know what they are, so I made him buy everything." Danny's defensive posture melted away instantly. For the first time since Alexander had met him, the boy truly smiled. Not the cautious half-smile of yesterday, but a radiant expression that transformed his entire face. Over breakfast in the sun-filled dining room, Alexander listened as the children talked. Sophia told Danny about her accident, her physical therapy sessions, her dreams of dancing again someday. She spoke with the matter-of-fact acceptance of a child forced to mature too quickly, but also with hope that Alexander hadn't heard in months. Danny shared stories of street life, which convenience stores had the cleanest restrooms, which restaurants discarded the best food, how to stay warm during storms. He spoke like a survival expert, which Alexander realized with growing horror he essentially was. "Where's your family, Danny?" Sophia asked with the directness only children possess. Danny's face shuddered, all warmth disappearing. "Gone. It's just me now." "What about your mama and papa?" "Mama got sick in her mind," Danny said quietly, staring at his plate. "She'd forget things. Forget who I was sometimes. She'd look at me like I was a stranger. One day she forgot so much she forgot to come home." Alexander felt something cold and sharp settle in his stomach. "Danny, what was your mama's name?" The boy hesitated, glancing between Alexander and Sophia, as if trying to gauge whether this information was safe to share. Finally, he whispered, "Elena." "Elena Hartwell. She used to be a dancer before I was born." The fork slipped from Alexander's hand, clattering against his plate with a sound that seemed to echo through the suddenly silent room. Over the following week, Danny became a constant presence in the Sterling household. Alexander had convinced him to stay temporarily while they figured out his situation, though he could see the boy remained ready to bolt at the first sign of trouble. Danny slept in the guest room but kept his few possessions in a backpack by the door, and Alexander had noticed him testing the window locks on his first night. What amazed Alexander was the complete transformation in Sophia. His daughter, who had barely spoken above a whisper since her accident, was now laughing, planning elaborate games, and insisting that Danny teach her to dance from her wheelchair. The house, which had felt like a mausoleum for months, was suddenly alive with children's voices and laughter. "It's all about the arms and the feeling," Danny explained patiently, demonstrating graceful movements that Sophia could copy from her chair. "Dancing isn't about legs. It's about heart. My mama taught me that. She said the angels don't have legs either, but they're the best dancers in heaven." Alexander watched from the doorway as his daughter attempted the fluid arm movements Danny showed her. Her face was flushed with concentration and joy, more animated than he'd seen her since before the accident. For the first time in months, Sophia looked like a child again instead of a tiny patient. But Danny remained guarded around Alexander. The boy was polite, grateful for the food and shelter. But there was an invisible wall between them that Alexander couldn't breach. It was as if Danny was waiting for the other shoe to drop, for Alexander to reveal himself as just another adult who would disappoint or abandon him. "He doesn't trust grown-ups," Sophia explained when Alexander asked about it during one of their father-daughter talks. "He says they always leave or lie or call the mean people, but he trusts me because I'm like him." "How are you like him?" "We're both broken," she said matter-of-factly, "but we're broken in different ways. So when we're together, the broken parts don't matter so much." That afternoon, Alexander made a decision that would change everything. He called his lawyer, his private investigator, and his head of security, giving them all the same instruction. Find out everything possible about Elena Hartwell's life after she supposedly died. But it was Mrs. Park, the elderly woman who ran the Korean restaurant behind Carson's corner store, who provided the first real breakthrough. "That boy, he's good child," she told Alexander when he found her that evening, her weathered hands folding dumplings with practiced precision. "Very polite, very grateful. His mama, she'd bring him here 3 years ago. Very sick woman, very sad. Beautiful once, I think, but the sickness, it took everything from her." "What kind of sickness?" Mrs. Park tapped her temple with a flour-dusted finger. "Her mind. She'd forget things, get confused. Sometimes she didn't remember the boy at all. She looked at him like a stranger, asked who he was, why he was there. Broke my heart, watching that little one try to help his mama remember him." Alexander's chest tightened. What happened to her? Mrs. Park's expression grew sad, her eyes distant with memory. She collapsed here one day, right there by the counter. Ambulance took her away. Boy tried to follow, but they said he wasn't family. Couldn't come. They asked for papers, birth certificates, but he was just a small child with nothing. He's been on the street ever since, waiting for her to come back. Do you know which hospital? Mercy Medical. Same place you found him dancing in the rain. Dr. Rachel Kim, Mercy Medical's chief administrator, was a woman in her 50s with compassionate eyes and the weary expression of someone who'd witnessed too much human suffering. She pulled out a thick file with obvious reluctance, her fingers drumming nervously on the manila folder. Mr. Sterling, what I'm about to share with you is highly confidential medical information. The only reason I'm sharing it at all is because of your substantial contributions to this hospital, and because I believe you genuinely want to help this child. Alexander leaned forward in his chair. I understand the sensitivity. Please just tell me what happened to Elena Hartwell. Dr. Kim opened the file, revealing pages of medical notes and photographs. She was admitted 2 years ago with severe early-onset dementia, complicated by what appeared to be drug-induced psychosis. When she arrived, she was in an advanced state of confusion and had no identification. She kept asking for someone named Alexander, saying she needed to find him before she forgot everything important. Alexander's chest tightened. What exactly did she say? According to the intake notes, she was quite agitated, repeating phrases like, Alexander needs to know about the boy, and I have to tell him the truth before it's too late. She mentioned having a son, but when social services investigated, they found no record of any children. The boy you've described, there's no documentation of his existence in our system. But if he was living with her, as Mrs. Park at the restaurant confirmed, I believe you. Without proper documentation, birth certificates, custody papers, medical records, he wouldn't have been recognized as her legal child. When she was transferred to our long-term care facility, there was no family listed, no emergency contacts. She became a ward of the state. Alexander felt sick. Where is she now? Dr. Kim's expression grew even more somber. Mr. Sterling, Elena Hartwell died 8 months ago. The dementia progressed rapidly, as it often does in early-onset cases. In her final weeks, she kept asking about her little dancer and someone named Alexander, who would take care of everything when the time came. The room seemed to spin around Alexander. Elena had been alive, had been sick, had died, all while he was building his fortune just miles away. Danny had been alone on the streets for 8 months, waiting for a mother who would never come home. There's more, Doctor. Kim continued, reaching into the file. In her lucid moments, which became increasingly rare, she drew these. She handed Alexander a manila envelope filled with sketches. His hand shook as he looked through them. Detailed drawings of a young boy dancing, of a man in a business suit with familiar features, of a little girl in a wheelchair. The artwork was sophisticated, clearly done by someone with formal training. At the bottom of one sketch, in Elena's familiar, elegant handwriting, were the words, Alexander will understand. Alexander will take care of them both. Love finds a way. She drew the wheelchair girl months before you started bringing your daughter here for therapy, Doctor. Kim said quietly. The nursing staff found it remarkable. She seemed to know things she couldn't possibly know. Alexander stared at the drawings, his mind reeling. How had Elena known about Sophia? How had she known to draw them together? Dr. Kim, I need everything. Elena's personal effects, her medical records, anything that might help me understand what happened. There wasn't much. Some clothes that the state disposed of, a few letters she never sent, and she paused, reaching for another document. This might interest you. She had a DNA test done shortly before she died. The DNA test results sat on Alexander's desk, like a ticking bomb. He'd been staring at them for an hour, unable to process what they meant. The test had been ordered by Elena herself during one of her final lucid periods, and the results were unambiguous. Danny was Alexander's biological son. The laboratory report included a note from Elena, written in her deteriorating handwriting. For Danny's father, if he's reading this, I'm sorry I never told you. I was afraid you wouldn't want us. But he's yours, Alexander. He has your eyes, your determined chin, your kind heart. Please love him the way I couldn't teach him to love himself. Alexander's hands trembled as he read the accompanying letter found among Elena's possessions. My dearest Alexander, if you're reading this, it means my memory has finally failed completely, and Danny has found his way to you somehow. I always believed he would. That boy has more of you in him than you'll ever know. I need you to know that leaving you was the hardest thing I ever did. But I was young and proud and terrified. When I found out I was pregnant 4 months after I left Chicago, I wanted to call you 1,000 times. But your mother had made it very clear that I was never to contact your family again. And I thought you were better off without us. I tried to raise him alone, Alexander. I did my best, but this sickness in my brain, it's taking everything from me. Some days I don't remember his name. Some days I look at this beautiful, brilliant child and see a stranger. It's killing me by inches, and it's terrifying him. But even as I forget everything else, I remember you. I remember how you used to hold me when I was scared, how you made me believe I was worthy of love. That's what Danny needs now. Someone to show him he's worthy of love. Someone to help him dance again. He's been taking care of me for 3 years, Alexander. 3 years. He's 6 years old, and he's been the parent while I've been the child. He deserves so much more than I can give him. I know this is unfair, dropping this truth on you after all these years, but he's yours and he needs you. And somewhere in my failing mind, I have faith that you'll do right by him. There's something else, something I need you to know. That little girl in my dreams, the one I keep drawing. I see her sometimes when I'm drifting between sleeping and waking. She's connected to Danny somehow, connected to you. She needs him as much as he needs her. Don't ask me how I know this. Call it a mother's intuition or the ravings of a diseased mind. But trust it. Take care of our son, Alexander. Help him. Remember that he's worthy of love. And tell him his mama loved him even when she couldn't remember his name. All my love, always and forever, Elena. Alexander wiped tears from his eyes as he finished reading. Everything made sense now. Danny's wariness around adults, his protective instincts toward Sophia, his desperate need to dance despite having no safe place to do it. The boy had been carrying impossible burdens for far too long. When Alexander finally returned home, he found Sophia and Danny in the living room. Sophia was in her wheelchair, and Danny was teaching her a complex routine that involved both arm movements and chair spins. They were both laughing, completely absorbed in their shared joy. "Papa," Sophia called out when she saw him, "look what Danny taught me. It's called the butterfly dance, because even if you can't fly, you can still be beautiful." Danny looked up, and for the first time, Alexander saw past the boy's carefully maintained defenses. He saw Elena's eyes, his own stubborn chin, and something indefinably familiar in the tilt of his head. "Danny, Sophia," Alexander said, his voice thick with emotion. "I need to tell you both something very important." Danny instantly went rigid, that familiar wariness returning. "Are you sending me away?" "No, son. I'm never sending you away again." The word son hung in the air, and Danny's eyes widened with dawning understanding. "Danny," Alexander continued, kneeling down to the boy's level, "your mama and I loved each other very much a long time ago, before you were born. before either of us knew how much we needed you. She wrote me a letter before she died, and she wanted me to tell you that you are my son, my real biological son." Danny stared at him for a long moment, processing this revelation. "You mean you're my papa?" "My actual papa." "Yes, and I'm sorry it took so long for us to find each other." Sophia let out a whoop of joy that could probably be heard 3 blocks away. "I knew it! I told you we were meant to be together." "I told you." But Danny remained very still, studying Alexander's face with an intensity that was both heartbreaking and wise beyond his years. "If you're my papa, why didn't you come looking for me when Mama got sick?" The question pierced Alexander's heart. "Because I didn't know you existed, son. Your mama never told me about you. She thought she was protecting us both. But you want me now, even though I'm just a street kid with nothing." Alexander pulled Danny into his arms for the first time, feeling how small and fragile his son was beneath the careful facade of toughness. "Danny, you're not just anything. You're my son, and you're Sophia's brother, and you're the most important thing that's ever happened to this family." Danny buried his face in Alexander's shoulder, and for the first time in 3 years, he allowed himself to cry. Not from sadness or fear, but from relief, from hope, from finally being home. "Papa," he whispered against Alexander's shirt, and the word transformed everything. 3 weeks after the DNA revelation, life at the Sterling mansion had found a new rhythm. Danny was slowly learning to trust that this wasn't temporary, that he wouldn't wake up one morning to find himself back on the streets. Sophia was stronger, happier, and had convinced Alexander to install a dance studio in one of the unused rooms where she and Danny could practice together. But their newfound peace was about to be shattered. Alexander was in his home office reviewing adoption papers his lawyer had prepared when Mrs. Henderson buzzed him from the main house. "Mr. Sterling, there are some people here to see you. They say it's about Danny." Through his office window, Alexander saw a black sedan parked in his driveway. 2 people in official suits stood on his front steps, and his blood ran cold when he recognized the woman, Patricia Wells from Child Protective Services. "Keep the children upstairs," Alexander instructed Mrs. Henderson quickly. "Don't let them see what's happening." But as he walked toward the front door, he heard Sophia's voice calling down from the landing. "Papa, who are those people? Danny's hiding in the closet. He says they're the ones who take kids away." Patricia Wells was a stern woman in her 50s, with graying hair and the tired expression of someone who'd seen too much human misery. Her companion, a younger man with a clipboard, introduced himself as Mark Davis from the state attorney's office. "Mr. Sterling," Patricia began without preamble, "we've received reports that you're harboring an undocumented minor child without proper legal custody. We need to speak with the boy." "Danny is my son," Alexander said firmly. "I have DNA test results proving paternity." "Which means nothing legally without proper custody procedures," Mark Davis interjected. "The child was living unsupervised on the streets for months. There are protocols, investigations that must be completed, child welfare assessments, home studies, background checks." "This is his home," Alexander said, his voice rising despite his efforts to stay calm. "I'm his biological father." "Biology doesn't equal legal custody," Patricia replied coldly. "Until the courts determine that placement with you is in the child's best interest, he needs to be placed in protective custody." From upstairs came the sound of Sophia's voice, high and desperate. "Danny, don't hide. Papa won't let them take you." But Danny's response was barely audible. "Yes, they will. They always do." Alexander's heart broke at the terror in his son's voice. "Give me 1 week. I'll fast-track every legal requirement you have. But please don't take him from the only family he's ever known." Patricia's expression softened slightly, as she looked around the obviously loving home. "Mr. Sterling, I understand your position, but there are procedures." "The boy has trauma issues," Mark interrupted, consulting his clipboard. "Street children often do. He needs professional evaluation, therapeutic intervention. The state can provide resources. The state can provide a group home where he'll be one of 20 kids sleeping on cots." Alexander shot back. "Here, he has a sister who loves him. Stability, individual attention, private therapy sessions already scheduled." Patricia looked torn. "I'm willing to consider a temporary arrangement, but there would have to be supervised visits, regular check-ins, and you'd need to file formal adoption papers within 48 hours. "Done," Alexander said immediately. "And the child would need to consent to staying. If he expresses any desire to leave, we remove him immediately." From upstairs came Sophia's voice again. "Danny, please come out. They're not going to take you. I won't let them." Finally, they heard Danny's small voice. "Promise." "I promise. We're family now, and families stick together." Slowly, carefully, Danny appeared at the top of the stairs, one hand gripping the banister like a lifeline. His eyes were wide with fear, but he was trying to be brave for Sophia's sake. "Are you Danny?" Patricia asked gently, her professional demeanor softening as she looked at the terrified child. Danny nodded, not trusting his voice. "Do you want to stay here with Mr. Sterling and Sophia?" "Yes, ma'am," Danny whispered. "Please don't make me leave." "I'll be good, I promise." Patricia exchanged a look with her colleague, then turned back to Alexander. 48 hours, Mr. Sterling. I'll need documentation, character references, medical records, and a full home study completed. If everything checks out, we can discuss a longer-term arrangement." As the officials left, Alexander found Danny and Sophia huddled together on the stairs, both children pale and shaken. "It's going to be okay," Alexander assured them, pulling both children close. "I'm going to make sure you never have to be afraid of losing this family again." But even as he spoke the words, Alexander knew the real battle was just beginning. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Alexander's mother, Victoria Sterling, arrived unannounced in her silver Mercedes. At 70, she was still formidable, with steel-gray hair and eyes that could cut glass. She hadn't visited the house since Sophia's accident, claiming the emotional atmosphere was too unsettling. "Alexander," she said crisply as she swept into his study, "we need to talk about this situation. If you mean my son, his name is Danny." Victoria's lips pursed. "Don't be dramatic. I've spoken with the family lawyers. This adoption nonsense could destroy everything your father and I built. The publicity alone." "Mother, I don't care about publicity." "Well, you should. Sterling Enterprises' reputation is built on stability, tradition, family values. What will the board think when they discover you've taken in some street child with questionable parentage?" "There's nothing questionable about his parentage. Danny is my biological son." Victoria waved dismissively. "With that woman, the dancer." "Really, Alexander? I thought we'd settled this years ago." "Elena Hartwell," Alexander said through gritted teeth. "Her name was Elena Hartwell, and she was an incredible woman who raised our son alone while I was playing corporate games. She was opportunistic trash, who saw a chance." "She was dying!" Alexander exploded, his composure finally cracking. "She was dying of dementia at 28, alone and confused, while our son lived on the streets because I was too proud, and you were too prejudiced to let me love her properly." Victoria recoiled as if slapped. "Lower your voice." "The children might hear." "The children have names, Mother. Sophia and Danny, your granddaughter and your grandson. Sophia is family. This boy is a complication. Danny is my son, which makes him your grandson whether you like it or not." From the doorway came a small voice. "Mr. Alexander, Mrs. Victoria, is everything okay?" They turned to see Danny standing hesitantly in the doorway, holding Sophia's hand. The boy's eyes were wide with concern, and Alexander realized he'd heard at least part of their conversation. Victoria looked at Danny with undisguised coldness. "So you're the boy causing all this fuss." Danny straightened his shoulders, meeting her gaze with dignity beyond his years. "I'm sorry if I'm causing problems, ma'am. I can leave if you want." "Danny," Sophia said fiercely, "you're not going anywhere." "Tell her, Papa." Alexander knelt down and pulled Danny close. "You're my son, and this is your home. No one gets to make you feel unwelcome here." Victoria's expression softened slightly as she watched the interaction, perhaps seeing something of Alexander in Danny's determined chin. "The boy has manners, at least." "He has much more than that," Alexander said. "He has courage, kindness, and more strength than most adults I know." "I can dance too," Danny added quietly. "I've been teaching Sophia." "She's really good at it." For a moment, Victoria's mask slipped, and Alexander saw a flash of something almost like interest. "You're a dancer like your mother?" Danny nodded. "She taught me before she got sick. She said dancing was how we talk to heaven when words aren't enough." Victoria was quiet for a long moment, studying Danny with new attention. "Show me," she said suddenly. "Mother," Alexander began, "show me this dancing that's supposedly so important." Danny looked uncertain, but Sophia squeezed his hand encouragingly. "Come on, Danny. Show her the butterfly dance we've been practicing." What followed was 5 minutes of pure magic. Danny and Sophia moved together with perfect synchronization. Danny's fluid grace complementing Sophia's precise arm movements from her wheelchair. They danced as if they'd been partners their whole lives, creating something beautiful from their individual limitations. When they finished, Victoria was very quiet. Finally, she spoke. That was adequate. Coming from Victoria Sterling, adequate was practically a standing ovation. "Mrs. Victoria," Danny said politely, "would you like to stay for lunch? We're having grilled cheese and tomato soup. Sophia says it's your favorite." Victoria looked startled at being invited so naturally into their family routine. "I suppose I could stay for a short while." As they walked toward the dining room, Alexander heard his mother ask Danny, "Tell me, young man, what else did your mother teach you?" For the first time since she'd arrived, Victoria Sterling sounded genuinely curious rather than coldly critical. Detective Maria Santos arrived at Alexander's office downtown with a thick folder and a grim expression. They'd been friends since college, and Maria had never looked this troubled about delivering information. "Alex, what I'm about to tell you is going to change everything. Are you sure you want to know this?" Alexander set down his coffee cup. "After everything that's happened, I need to know the truth." Maria opened the folder, revealing police reports, hospital records, and photographs. Elena Hartwell didn't die 9 years ago. That was staged. Someone with serious resources made her disappear from official records while keeping her alive under a false identity. "What?" "Who would do that?" "Your father, Alex?" Harrison Sterling had Elena Hartwell's death faked. The words hit Alexander like a physical blow. "That's impossible." Maria pulled out a bank statement. Payments to a private investigator, a funeral director, and a doctor who specialized in creating false identities for witness protection. All traced back to accounts controlled by your father. Alexander stared at the documents, his world tilting on its axis. Why would he do that? Because Elena was pregnant when she left Chicago. She tried to contact you 7 months after she left, but your father intercepted the letters. He hired people to make sure she never reached you. Maria showed him copies of letters in Elena's handwriting, dozens of them addressed to Alexander, but never sent. "My dearest Alexander," one began, "I don't know if you'll ever read this, but I had to try. I'm pregnant. The baby is yours, and I love him already, even though he's barely the size of a bean. I know you have your life, your world that I was never part of. But I thought you deserved to know." She tried to tell me. Alexander whispered, "Your father found out about the pregnancy through the private investigator he'd hired to watch her. He was terrified of the scandal, the impact on the family reputation, so he made her disappear. But the funeral, the death certificate, all fake. Elena was moved to Chicago's South Side under a new identity. Your father's people set her up with a small apartment, minimal income, but she was essentially trapped. If she tried to contact you or anyone from her old life, the support would disappear." Alexander felt sick. "She lived in Chicago all this time while I was here building my empire." "It gets worse, Alex. When Danny was born, she tried to register him under his real name, Daniel Alexander Sterling. Your father's people blocked it. The boy has no legal identity, because your father made sure he couldn't be traced back to you." My God. Maria pulled out the final document, a hospital record from Elena's admission 2 years ago. "When Elena developed dementia, your father's payments stopped. She was alone, confused, with a 4-year-old child, and no support system. The apartment was lost. The medical care ended. That's when they ended up on the streets." Alexander's hands shook as he processed the implications. "My father let my son live on the streets rather than risk a scandal. There's more. Your father died knowing about Danny. He had regular reports about Elena's condition, about the boy's situation. He knew your son was homeless and did nothing." The rage that filled Alexander was unlike anything he'd ever experienced. His father had stolen 9 years of his life. 9 years he could have spent with Elena and Danny. He'd condemned his own grandson to poverty and abandonment to protect the family name. "Alex, there's something else. Child Protective Services. Their visit yesterday wasn't random. Someone tipped them off about Danny." "Who?" Maria's expression was grave. "The call came from someone at Sterling Enterprises. Internal number, high-level access. Someone in your own company is trying to have Danny removed." Alexander stood up abruptly, his chair clattering backward. "I need to get home. Now." "Alex, whatever you're thinking, I'm thinking that my family has been under attack for 9 years, and I didn't even know it. But it stops now." As Alexander raced toward his car, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You can't protect them forever. Some secrets are too dangerous to keep. A friend." The war for his family was far from over. Alexander burst through his front door to find chaos. Sophia was crying in her wheelchair while Mrs. Henderson, their housekeeper, tried to comfort her. Danny was nowhere to be seen. "Where is he?" Alexander demanded. "They took him," Sophia sobbed. "Those people came back with more papers, and they took Danny away." Mrs. Henderson looked stricken. "Mr. Sterling, there was nothing I could do. They had a court order, said there were new concerns about the boy's safety. Danny fought them, but—" Alexander's phone rang. The caller ID showed his mother's number. "Alexander." Victoria's voice was trembling. "I need to tell you something about your father, about what he did." "I already know, Mother." "Maria Santos told me everything." "Not everything." Victoria's voice broke. "I helped him, Alexander. I helped your father fake Elena's death because I thought I was protecting you." The admission hit Alexander like a sledgehammer. "You knew? You knew I had a son and you let him live on the streets?" "I didn't know about the child at first." Harrison told me Elena was just trying to trap you with pregnancy claims. By the time I realized the boy was real, was actually your son. It had gone too far. Harrison said if the truth came out, it would destroy everything. So you let my son be homeless rather than admit you made a mistake. I was wrong, Victoria whispered. I was so terribly wrong. But Alexander, there's something else. Patricia Wells from Child Services. She's not working alone. Someone's been feeding her information, manipulating the system to have Danny removed. Who? Your cousin Bradley. He's been angling for control of Sterling Enterprises since your father died. If you're distracted by a custody battle, if there's scandal about your illegitimate son, the board might vote to replace you as CEO. Alexander's blood ran cold. Bradley Sterling had always resented Alexander's position as heir to the family fortune, but using a child, using Danny as a weapon was beyond evil. Where did they take him? Riverside Group Home on the west side. But Alexander, you can't just storm in there. They have legal custody now. If you do anything rash, you'll lose any chance of getting him back. Then what do I do? Victoria's voice strengthened with resolve. We fight. We tell the truth about what your father did, what we all did. We expose Bradley's manipulation, and we bring our grandson home. Alexander hung up and turned to Sophia, who was watching him with tears streaming down her face. Papa, you have to get Danny back. He was so scared. He kept saying he knew this would happen, that good things don't last for street kids. I'm going to bring him home, sweetheart. I promise. But even as Alexander made the promise, he knew the odds were stacked against them. Danny was in the system now, and the system was designed to protect children from exactly the kind of family dysfunction the Sterlings represented. His phone buzzed with another text from the unknown number. Custody hearings can be so unpredictable, especially when certain facts about the family come to light. Still think you can win this? Alexander stared at the message, realizing with growing horror that Danny's removal was just the beginning. Someone was planning to destroy not just his custody chances, but his entire life, and they were using his innocent son as the weapon to do it. Alexander's law office had been transformed into a war room. Documents covered every surface, and Chicago's top family law attorneys huddled around the conference table. It had been 3 days since Danny's removal, and Alexander hadn't slept since. Marcus Webb, his head of security, entered with a grim expression. Boss, I found the source of the leaks. You're not going to like it. Tell me. Janet Morrison, your personal assistant. She's been feeding information to Bradley for months. Phone logs, appointment schedules, personal conversations she overheard. She's how he knew about Danny, about the DNA test, everything. Alexander felt the betrayal like a knife. Janet had worked for him for 6 years, had been at Sophia's bedside after the accident, had helped him through his darkest moments. Why? Bradley promised her a promotion and a $75,000 bonus if she helped him gather evidence of your instability. She recorded conversations, photographed documents, even took pictures of Danny in the house. Attorney Sarah Chen looked up from her legal briefs. Alexander, this is actually good news. If we can prove that Bradley orchestrated Danny's removal through fraudulent means, we can get an emergency hearing to reverse the custody order. What do we need? Evidence of Bradley's manipulation, proof that the CPS reports were based on false information, and character witnesses who can testify to your fitness as a parent. Alexander's phone rang. Dr. Rachel Kim from Mercy Medical Center. Mr. Sterling, I'm calling because something strange is happening. A man claiming to be a family law investigator came here asking about Elena Hartwell's medical records. He had authorization papers, but something felt off. I wanted to check with you before releasing anything. What did he look like? 40s, expensive suit, very entitled attitude. He kept insisting that he needed the records for a custody evaluation involving Elena's son. Alexander's blood boiled. Bradley was trying to dig up Elena's medical history to use against Danny in court. Dr. Kim, don't release anything to anyone except my authorized attorneys. And thank you for calling. After hanging up, Alexander turned to his legal team. We need to go on the offensive. Bradley thinks he can manipulate the system and destroy my family. He's wrong. Attorney Michael Chen looked up from his laptop. I've been researching Bradley's background. He's got some interesting financial problems, gambling debts, failed investments, a bitter divorce where his ex-wife accused him of emotional abuse. If he's planning to take over Sterling Enterprises, it's probably because he's desperate. What about Sophia? Sarah Chen asked. How is she handling Danny's removal? Alexander's heart clenched. She's devastated. She barely eats, won't leave her room. She keeps asking when Danny's coming home, and I don't know what to tell her. Marcus spoke up. Boss, there's something else. I've been monitoring the group home where they placed Danny. The kid's not doing well. Not eating, won't talk to the counselors. Spends all his time sitting by the window watching for cars, thinking you might be coming to get him. The image of Danny waiting by a window, still believing Alexander would rescue him, nearly broke Alexander's resolve. How long until we can get a hearing? Emergency hearing is scheduled for tomorrow morning, Sarah replied. But Alexander, you need to prepare yourself. The other side is going to attack your character, your fitness as a parent, even your relationship with Sophia. They're going to make this ugly. Let them try. I've lost 9 years with my son because of my family's lies and manipulations. I'm not losing another day. Alexander's phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. But this time it wasn't a threat. It was a photo of Danny sitting alone in a sterile group home room, staring out the window with tears on his face. Below the photo was a single line. 48 hours until the real battle begins. Are you ready to lose everything? Alexander looked around the room at his legal team, his head of security, and the mountain of evidence they'd assembled. Tomorrow would determine not just whether he got Danny back, but whether his family would survive intact. We're going to win, he said with quiet determination. Whatever it takes, we're bringing my son home. But as Alexander stared at the photo of Danny's tear-stained face, he realized that winning in court might not be enough. Danny had been abandoned too many times, betrayed by too many adults. Even if Alexander got him back, healing the damage might take a lifetime. The custody hearing was just the beginning. The real battle would be convincing a traumatized 6-year-old that this time, family really meant forever. The Cook County Family Court was packed as Judge Margaret Foster called the emergency custody hearing to order. Alexander sat at the plaintiff's table with his legal team, while Bradley Sterling occupied the gallery behind them, his smug expression barely concealed. Across the aisle, Danny sat between 2 social workers, looking impossibly small in clothes that didn't fit properly. When Danny's eyes met Alexander's, the boy's face crumpled with hope and fear. He mouthed the word, Papa, and Alexander had to grip the table to keep from rushing to him. Your Honor, Bradley's attorney began, Mr. Alexander Sterling is clearly unfit to care for this child. He has a history of abandoning responsibilities, as evidenced by his 9-year absence from the boy's life. Furthermore, recent investigations have revealed concerning financial irregularities at Sterling Enterprises that suggest— Objection, Sarah Chen interrupted, standing. Your Honor, we have evidence that Mr. Bradley Sterling has orchestrated this entire custody challenge through fraudulent means for personal financial gain. Judge Foster raised an eyebrow. Explain. Sarah activated the courtroom's display system. We have recordings of phone conversations between Bradley Sterling and the plaintiff's former assistant, Janet Morrison, in which Mr. Bradley Sterling explicitly discusses using the child as a weapon to destabilize Alexander Sterling's control of the family company. The recorded conversation filled the courtroom. Bradley's voice, clear and damning. "Keep feeding me information about the kid." If we can make Alexander look unstable, unfit to be a parent, the board will have no choice but to remove him as CEO. A custody battle is perfect. It makes him look irresponsible and puts his judgment in question. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Danny looked confused, but his social worker was whispering explanations that made his eyes widen with understanding. "Furthermore," Sarah continued, "we have evidence that Bradley Sterling has been working with certain individuals at Child Protective Services to fabricate concerns about the child's welfare." She presented bank records showing payments from Bradley to Patricia Wells's personal account. Payments that coincided exactly with the dates of CPS visits and reports. Judge Foster's expression darkened. "Are you alleging corruption within the child protective system?" "We're alleging that a desperate man has manipulated the system to achieve personal gain, using a traumatized child as his weapon." Bradley's attorney looked stricken as his client whispered frantically in his ear, but the damage was mounting. "Your Honor," Michael Chen stood, "we also have testimony from Mrs. Victoria Sterling, the child's paternal grandmother, who wishes to make a full confession about the family's past actions." Victoria Sterling walked to the witness stand with dignity, though her hands trembled slightly. At 70, she looked every one of her years. "Your Honor, 28 years ago, my husband Harrison Sterling and I made a terrible decision. We discovered that our son Alexander had fathered a child with a woman we deemed unsuitable for our family. Rather than support the relationship, we orchestrated an elaborate deception." The courtroom was dead silent. "We faked the mother's death, relocated her under a false identity, and ensured that Alexander never learned about his son. For 9 years, we allowed our grandson to live in poverty, and eventually on the streets rather than admit our mistake." Judge Foster leaned forward. "You're confessing to fraud, conspiracy, and child endangerment." "Yes, Your Honor. I am also testifying that my nephew Bradley was aware of these facts and has been using them to manipulate this custody case for his own financial benefit." Bradley shot to his feet. "She's lying." "She's senile, desperate to protect her son." "Mr. Sterling." Judge Foster's voice cut like ice. "Sit down immediately, or I'll hold you in contempt." The final blow came when Marcus Webb presented evidence of Bradley's gambling debts, failed business ventures, and desperate financial situation. The man who had portrayed himself as a concerned family member was revealed as a desperate opportunist, willing to traumatize a child for money. Judge Foster reviewed the evidence for what felt like hours, while Danny sat rigid in his chair, occasionally glancing at Alexander with eyes that held too much hope for a 6-year-old to bear. Finally, the judge spoke. "In 25 years on this bench, I have rarely seen such a clear case of system manipulation and child exploitation. The custody order removing Daniel Sterling from his father's care is hereby reversed immediately." Danny's head snapped up, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Furthermore," Judge Foster continued, "I'm ordering an immediate investigation into the actions of all parties involved in this fraudulent custody challenge. Mr. Bradley Sterling, you will remain in this courtroom to answer questions from the District Attorney's Office." As the gavel fell, Danny broke free from his social workers and ran across the courtroom into Alexander's arms. Father and son collided with desperate intensity, both of them sobbing with relief. "Papa, you came for me," Danny whispered against Alexander's shoulder. "I knew you would. I told them you'd come." "I will always come for you," Alexander promised, his voice thick with emotion. "Always. You're my son, and nothing will ever separate us again." Later that evening, back at home, Alexander found Danny and Sophia in the newly completed dance studio. Sophia was in her wheelchair, and Danny was teaching her a routine that incorporated both their abilities, They moved together with perfect synchronization, creating something beautiful from their individual challenges. "We've been practicing all week," Sophia announced proudly. "Danny choreographed it himself. It's called Finding Home." As Alexander watched his children dance together, his daughter, who couldn't walk, and the son he'd nearly lost, he understood what Elena had tried to tell him in her final letter. Love really did find a way. Despite his father's cruelty, despite years of separation and trauma, despite a system designed to protect children that had been corrupted for personal gain, they had found each other. Danny broke away from the routine and walked to Alexander, taking his hand with the simple trust of a child who finally believed in permanent love. "Papa," he said quietly, "do you think Mama can see us now?" Alexander knelt down, looking into eyes that held Elena's warmth and his own determination. "I think she's been watching over us all along, son. I think she's the reason we found each other." "And I think she's happy," Sophia added, rolling her wheelchair closer to complete their family circle. As they stood together in their dance studio, surrounded by mirrors that reflected their love back at them infinitely, Alexander finally understood the true meaning of wealth. It wasn't the money in his accounts or the company bearing his name. It was this: a son who danced with angels, a daughter who refused to let anything dim her light, and the second chance to be the father they both deserved. Outside, Chicago's skyline glittered in the evening light. But inside the Sterling home, 3 hearts beat in perfect rhythm. A family that had been broken by pride and fear, but healed by love and the determination to never let go of each other again. Danny took Alexander's hand and Sophia's, and together they moved in a simple dance of gratitude. 3 souls finally home where they belonged.